Thank you all for being here. We have an exciting session for you. I think this is something that's always on everyone's mind, right? Strategic financial thinking. This is something conservation districts are like wizards at. It's amazing. And so we have some crazy talent in the room and one crazy talent online here, probably more online, I don't know about. But we have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to introduce them so you know kind of what you're in for. These are some great folks to be listening to. So our first speaker is going to be Kat Lewis. She has served conservation districts at every level. Associate and elected supervisor at Kitsap Conservation District in the 90s. Executive director, then finance coordinator at Pierce Conservation District from 2001 to 2019. And now a consultant to CDs on an array of management and financial topics. Kat builds models to create and protect long-term financial stability for Washington State Conservation District. She'll be our first speaker. She'll be followed by Craig Nelson. Craig has been leading Okanagan Conservation District since 1996. During his 26-year tenure, he completed multiple watershed plans as a coordinator, facilitator, and writer. He worked with dozens of partners over the years to develop programs and projects that focused on water quality, wildlife habitat, riparian ecosystems, forest health, soil health, air quality, and more. Throughout his career, he has worked with his board and funding partners to develop programs and funding that have caused periods of growth to the district. 3 distinct times in his career, he and his board have had to deal with greater than 50% staff loss in a few short months to continue to provide quality conservation programs. So that's kind of, that's some ninja financial work right there. Ryan Williams will be our third speaker. He has worked for conservation districts for 16 years, starting as water quality technician and working his way down, he says, to executive director. Ryan has managed complex habitat restoration projects, programs, and now conservation district. He's also Ag Forestry Leadership Program graduate class of 40. He has successfully completed multiple rates and charges renewals over the years and assisted several other districts with their rates and charges process. So he's a go-to guy on that, among other things. So let's see if this clicker will work for me. I'm going to dance. I'm going to have to figure out. Let's see what you mind. Did I put it? Turning it on. This is advanced. It's still doesn't work. You may have to do it. Okay. Thing on the thing. Technical terms.
Do the thingy.
Do the thing with the thing so it'll.
Okay, now?
Thing to another thing.
Is it working now?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So here's what we're going to do today. Pat is going to talk about principles of strategic financial management, give us a nice sort of conceptual overview. And then Craig is going to talk about harnessing strategic planning and partnerships to support your long-term financial growth and or stability, depending on your goals. And then Ryan's going to talk about building enough flexible funding. So think indirect rate, scale considerations, rates and charges, et cetera, as a base for leverage, right? Thinking about things in that way is critical. And then we're hoping all of y'all will help talk about tips and tricks and strategies. And then we'll hopefully have time for questions and discussion at the end, because we know there are particulars that you can ask these folks about and they'll be able to help you. So with that, Kat, I think we're going to turn this to you next. And we should have your, I know I'm supposed to, there we go. This is your first slide here, Kat, and we got you unmuted. Take it away.
Awesome. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
very nice.
Okay, great. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. I'm a week shy of the 100-day mark of chemo and stem cell transplant, so I can't be around crowds for a while, but I really wish I could be there with you guys. Everything's going well and it's really good to be here, and I'm a sucker for silent auctions, so maybe it's good for my bank account. I'm not. I've been doing strategic financial management for districts and nonprofits for quite a while now. And one of the things I like to ask leaders when they first find out what I do and ask for my help is, what keeps you up at night? And the answer is always the same. I don't want to lay people off. People worry about finances. They worry about, how do I keep this excellent staff? You know, we love the people that work for conservation districts. And I have never had anybody say anything in response to what keeps you up at night differently than to say, I don't want to lose any of my people. So I'm assuming everybody here in the room has some stake in this topic. You're either senior leadership or you work for them in the financial system. And that's why you're here talking about something that's a real passion of mine. I want you to know that we know that there are a lot of different kinds of models out there. We talked about not spending a lot of time on a show and tell of models, but really talking about principles, because conservation districts are so localized and individualized. You're going to kind of create your own model to fit your own needs. And if you want to talk to me more about the kind of models I do or the approach I do to help districts with long-term financing, please contact me. How do you create long-term financial stability? I really see two things that need to happen. The first is your financial system itself. You need to have the ability to clearly track your finances. I know of 3 different approaches that districts in Washington State use for their financial systems, and I think all 3 are appropriate. I've worked in 2 of the 3, SBX and QuickBooks. The ability to clearly track your finances leads to long-term financial stability by allowing you to predict the future. You can look at past data. The longer your data has been in the same format, the more your power to predict. So like if you're at a district where people are talking about changing the financial system, I would look at that with some skepticism. It's good to stick with what you have if it's working, because the longer your data set is, the more ability you have to predict the future. Good internal financial tracking promotes internal confidence. The team has confidence in the finances because they feel like everything's being tracked right, even if they grumble about the paperwork you make them do, you know. And most importantly, if you've got good internal financial tracking, it's going to help you sleep at night, because you're going to know, have a good gut feel for if there is any financial danger, and if there is, how far out you have to take care of it before it hits. Also, clearly tracking your internal finances assists in projecting confidence to your funders. Nothing will kill funder confidence better than them feeling like you're not tracking your money well. And I've seen that happen a couple times. The other thing about long-term financial stability that the other speakers are going to talk more about is a plan for the future. You need to have a plan for the future, and how far out you choose to look and how far out you choose to plan, that's really up to you. I like 5 or 6 year plans because I started off in road departments and that's what we did. But you need to have some sort of way to model out past the current year in order to have financial stability. Salary is always going to be your biggest challenge. It's good to have some sort of a benchmark for how much of your overall district budget you're going to allow salary to be. Salary will always creep up because of inflation, and you have to plan for increasing staff cost. And then you have to have the ability to communicate your plan, both internally and to outsiders. If you can do that, if you can have a plan, a good internal financial system, and the ability to communicate that plan and communicate your district's finances, you're going to create long-term financial stability. That's just how it works. How do you protect it? Well, it's partly the ability, again, to communicate your finances, and doing that, communicating both to your internal team, your board, and to external funders. Here's where we're at. Here's what our future needs are. Here's what our plans are, the ability to communicate those things. And then you have to build some flexibility into that plan somehow, because you don't know what's going to happen 3 or 4 years from now. I'll give you an example. At Pierce Conservation District, we had the opportunity to create a 10-year rate plan, which is the dream of every district. We're going to have stable financing for 10 years. We had that 10-year rate plan approved in 2016. It was a work of beauty. I say that as one of the architects of it. We had no idea that 3 years later, COVID was going to hit. Okay, so if we hadn't built some flexibility into that plan, we would have been in deep trouble. It's still going to be a challenge, but because we created some funds that could be used flexibly, we were able to adapt to the challenge of COVID. So you have to build some flexibility into your plan. This is a topic I could go on in hours. I could go down rabbit holes. I don't want to do that. I just wanted to give you an overview. Again, feel free to contact me, and later on, I'll be happy to answer any questions people have.
Thank you. And before I introduce our next speaker, I said we already introduced him. So I was asked by the conference organizers to remind folks that checkout is at 11 at the danger of losing my audience. So if you haven't already done that, you'll need to take care of that. And Nelson, and this should advance your slides.
Okay, that's good. Well, should and would are probably two different things. Okay, so I get to talk to you about the fun topic of strategic planning and how that impacts your long-term sustainable funding. So I thought, oh man, how am I going to make this fun? So I love memes. I can sit and scroll through memes on social media for hours. And so, yeah, I wasn't planning for the bars to be in there, but anyways, yeah, that's okay. So in my experience, developing long-term sustainable funding has almost always started with having a good plan. What is it that we are trying to achieve? What are our goals? How are we going to get there? What we need to do is we need to, as was explained to me by a former supervisor of ours many years ago, we're going to lay our tracks. We're going to build our train tracks. We are going to set a destination. This is where we're going to go. We may not even be able to quite see it out there. It's beyond the hills. It's over the river. It's through the forest, whatever analogy works for you. But you know the direction you want to go. And you're going to lay those tracks. And those tracks are really important. The metaphor is really important because the tracks keep you on path. This is where we're going. But also, as you can well imagine, changing directions when you're a train on tracks is very difficult. You have to purposefully move your tracks if you're going to change your direction, right? But here's the other thing. Trains also have train stops. They have depots they pull into, and other people can join. Okay, and if people decide they don't like where your train's going, they can get off too. That's okay, all right? Because our partners come and go. Being realistic, they come and go. And so really trying to look at the idea of laying your tracks, building your program is going to require you to have that kind of purpose direction. So it is not for the faint of heart. We've all done strategic planning. It can be a painful process, but it doesn't have to be. Going into it with the right attitude is really critical, and the attitude is contagious. If you are leading your district in the development of the plan, whether actually facilitating it or you're finding the facilitator that helps us and that helps you, develop that plan, whatever. The attitude that you're going to have about it, if you're like dreading it, and I got to do this again, my regional manager keeps reminding me that I've got to turn this in every 5 years. Oh, it was just last year I did it. No, it was 4 years ago. Oh, crap. Okay. But you go into it with that attitude, you're going to get that kind of a product out of it. Okay. You go into it with the attitude, okay, this is an opportunity for us to really set what's going to work for us. What are the programs that we need? What are the needs that people are communicating to us? And how do we best get there? Okay. So having that kind of, maybe not, everything's all gumdrops and bubble gum, but having a positive attitude that this is an opportunity for you to really set your course is really critical. For my district, we have in our policies, if there is an opportunity for us to do a project and it's already included in our long range plan, I don't have to wait for a board meeting to go get started on it because that's our goal. We know this is our plan. This fits with our plan. Staff have the green light. Now we need to report at the next board meeting. Yes, use obviously good choices on like, well, yeah, this seems like it fits in there. Maybe it doesn't, but it's close. What the heck? Let's go have fun. No, that's not how that does. But it is an opportunity for us to work more quickly on those opportunities that arise. So, okay. So, but that positive attitude pendulum can swing both ways, a little too far, okay? Be realistic, you know, you set yourself some goals and some that vision and push the boundary. Don't blow right through them, okay? This is not getting in the roadster and going as fast as you can past the boundaries. But, okay, we want to, let's say Forest Health is gonna be our priority. You know, we want to, you know, our historic is, we've been able to deliver, 500 acres of forest health improvement every year over the last few years. We want to push it to 750, in the next couple of years, and maybe 1,000 acres in 5 years. That's okay. Those are pushing. And if you don't get there, that's okay. But it gives you, we're pushing the envelope. Or, there's some growing conversation in the community about air quality concerns. Is that something that we can help with? Well, let's put a goal in there that allows us to explore that opportunity of how we can help our community deal with this new resource concern that is a growing consideration. So, have your goals, you take those, you plus your existing resources and your needed resources, and that becomes your strategic plan. Okay. All right. That's very simplistic. It is far more complex than that. And you all know that, but I needed to fit it onto a little slide. So, and I had like a day and a half to do it because Gene kept reminding us, and I kept putting it off and kept putting it off, so anyway. So, you want your recipe for success. It's a lot of it is about who you are working on this strategic plan with. Who are your partners? Is it just the board developing the strategic plan? Is it the board and the district manager? Is it the board, the district manager, and all the staff? Do you invite those pesky regional managers in? Do you invite maybe your local commodity organizations? Your cattlemen's, your grain growers, maybe there's some other organizations that you work with. Do you invite them in? How about your county commissioners? Have any of you ever developed your strategic plan with a county commissioner in the room? Really? Get them in there because well, okay, fine, yes, you should do that too, but it is really cool to invite people that can make decisions that directly affect your funding. Invite them in. You don't have to do everything they tell you to do, but you can at least get their input, and they're part of the problem then. They're also part of the plan. So give them an opportunity. So all of these partners and other inputs, they add all of that flavor to that soup that you're making. Okay, they're adding the vegetables, they're adding the spices, they're adding all of those things that are really going to help make your plan a success and set that vision for where you can go and what you can achieve. All right, so this one is about this is a really important thing about plans. You're all chuckling. Can you all been there? I know it. I know for darn sure you've all been there. Stay the course. Stay the course, because all of my staff will tell you I am the biggest squirrel.
Shiny.
Shiny thing. Yeah. You know what? For me, it doesn't even have to be shiny. It just has to be moving for crying out loud. It will be like distracted immediately. So remember, come back to your plan. Is this in my plan? Is this in my course? Is this where my train tracks are laid? Is this what I'm doing? Don't be too quick to drop what your mission is to pick up that new shiny thing. Just, oh yeah, jingle, 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 here's some money. But is that what you should be doing? Really have that question, and it's okay. And I put this in here. I want credit for this, Alyssa. Yes. It's okay to say no. I'm learning. It's at least I'd say 12 steps, but that's far too many steps, or far too few steps. It's at least a 100-step process for me to learn how to say no, but that's the deal. So with your plan, you need to be specific. What exactly, like I was talking about, the number of acres of forest health that you want to do. Is it can you be specific with the number of acres that you can implement? Try to be as specific as you can. Who are your partners for that particular aspect of your plan? Who is the lead? And it's the lead, not the group. or anything else. And I used to do this too. I'd be like, okay, who's responsible? The board. Well, now nobody's accountable. Because that board member is gonna assume that board member is gonna assume that that board member, and so on and so forth. Put a person there. They don't have to be the one that does everything in it. Put one person responsible that will report back. We say, Alyssa, your job is to track such and such program. Report back quarterly or annually or whatever it is. And set that timeline. What is the timeline? When will things be done? When will reports be done? Give yourself, I mean, that is as much part of the goals as anything, is setting those timelines for when things will be accomplished and who's going to report back on accomplishments. Have accountability, okay? That's probably one of the greatest things on a 5-year plan, long-range plan, is who is going to be accountable for making sure certain activities are done, okay? So if we assign something to Alyssa and we don't ever ask her to follow up and report back, and it doesn't get done, yeah, she's got some blame, but so do we. Because we didn't say, hey, Alyssa, where is that report on that stuff? You know, so that's gotta be part of it too. So that's I think my 7 steps to terrible long-range planning. So happy to answer questions in a little bit. I think that's my last one.
Is that your last slide?
Yeah, I think
Let's
so.
advance and see. Yeah.
There we
So,
go.
Brian, I think you're up next.
Tom, there you go.
Question,
Okay.
so personal experience, Craig, have you had anything in your strategic plan that's been there for 5 years or greater that you just can't get at?
Yeah, I have several items, but they stay there because they're still a priority. And we've had a few items that have been there, like, I mean, you know, I've been here 26 years. So we had things that were in our plan way back when I started. It stayed there, it stayed there, it stayed there. And I think it was on our third 5-year plan. When we finally achieved it, which was to hire somebody dedicated to in-classroom education, you know, conservation education. And we finally hit that. So
And that's,
it could
the
take,
point, that's why I asked you.
yeah, it could take time.
If it's your priority, doesn't matter if you have a dollar.
Yeah.
Or not, it stays your priority.
Yeah.
It gives you something to focus on, it's part of your tracks.
Yeah, and just because you didn't achieve it doesn't mean it's a failure. It's just this 5-year period wasn't the time right, but it could still be the priority. Absolutely. So thank you.
I'm just gonna move this mic. Pick you up better.
Yeah, yeah, I get to follow Craig all the time. He's my neighbor. And he has sweet PowerPoints with like memes and such, and I decided to put some pretty photos of Chelan County. At least. You know, Saddle Rock, down in Wenatchee, it's a cool hike. Recommend it. So thinking about this, we were talking about like what I'm not as experienced as some other folks are in this realm, but I've been around the block, I guess, a little bit. And one of the things I seem to fall into my book of business seems to be rates and charges. So if you just talk a little bit, I don't know how many of you heard about it. I know there's a lot of veterans here, and some people who actually haven't. Sorry. I'm gonna call it. But no, so it's an option. So thinking about long-term strategic health of a district is one of the options in the RCW for us that was added is rates and charges. There's also an assessment, but we'll not talk about that part. You know, there's 2 options, right? There's a couple different methods that we can use. There's some court case stuff around the assessment thing, so you need to be real cognizant of that part. But in general, rates and charges is a way for us to try to actually get base funding, locally sourced base funding. And you have to do it in partnership with your county commissioners. That's the big component, is they're the ones who authorize it. And that's why it's important, you know, to try to include them, get them really involved in the work you're doing. So rates and charges, the system is basically, and there's a lot of detail on how it works. A lot of times you basically have to do a rate study. You go out and you work on, you have your strategic plan, including like budget numbers, how much money you need to provide the services you want to provide to your community. It's a method around, it's more like a fire district's method, where fire districts say to provide fire protection, here's the cost. And then this is how much it's going to cost you, your share of that cost. And so we have some limitations around how much we can charge. So we'll come up with this plan that's like $5 million worth of work. And we're like, yeah, you can get $5 a person. And so in the end, you get $200,000 or something. But it's a foundation to build off of. And that's what's great about rates and charges. There's some great pros. It can be fairly flexible in terms of you come up with your plan and it's locally set. It's not dependent on grant funding priorities. Ecology has their own priorities. There's all kinds of programs that have their own specific flavor to what they want you to do. With rates and charges, you have a little more freedom to do what the community wants you to do, or what you see as a really important element that's missing from all these other programs. In a lot of cases, it ends up being, it's kind of pays for the administrative costs, nobody else pays for. That's just kind of that's what the foundation is, because a lot of people don't want to pay for the things that we actually need to operate. It can be they're usually fairly persistent funds, like it depends on the county commissioners, but they could be anywhere from 1 to 10 years authorization to collect that funding. Everybody is best to go for 10 if you can, because then you have that long-term surety that you have at least this money coming in the door. But sometimes, depending on, it's still kind of a political thing, but the political situation, they may only approve 1 year, and you have to come back and come back and keep coming back. And so really trying to, and that's part of a trust thing. We're trying to build trust, and they're trying to get through and feel like they're comfortable with just handing you the budget and kind of working with you on that. Which is great, but it does take political will. So you have to work with your county commissioners. You have to have a group who's willing to authorize taxes on your behalf, basically, and willing to answer for that. So the county commissioners are going to hear about this. Why is there now a $5 charge on my property tax bill? And, in a lot of cases, we try to have them call us. Like, I've had people call and say, why am I getting, $4.63, which is our rate per year? And I tell them what I do, and they're like, okay, sounds great. Sounds like you're doing a great job. I'm willing to pay that bill. But you have to be willing to actually have that conversation, and the county commissioners have to be willing to answer that as well. And as I said, we have some statutory caps in the law. So it's 8908, 405, or 400 is the assessment one. We have some caps based on population, where most counties are capped at $5 parcel per year, plus up to 5 cents an acre. Or the 10, okay. 10. Still not. But in the end, right, if your natural resources need is generally we feel our needs are huge, like if you want to use a rates and charges or assessment to fund a forestry, like a program, say in this county, the rates and charges isn't going to go far. But anyway, so it's just kind of keeping that reality in place of it'll fund a portion. It's going to be a nice foundation to then use to leverage for other funding sources. And the renewals, you have to keep engaged with the commissioners, take them on tours, keep them going, keep the rate and charges as a renewable thing. There's a lot of details that goes into it, a lot of there's consultants that help you through this work, especially on your first round. I've helped a couple districts through. I don't know, it seemed like it worked, but I don't know how hopefully I did good enough to work, but I don't necessarily, there's a lot of detail that goes into this process, and there's a whole step process that sometimes better handled by a rate study, basically, is what you have to conduct. And so there's a group that's helped us a lot, this FCS group helps as rates have done most districts, at least the first round, and then they can help you kind of make sure you're dotting all the T's, crossing, you know, the I's, all that fun stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of like a one way to have a base of the work, you know, to have you have a support, a minimum support to help keep the doors open and keep a staff person that you normally couldn't fund it, or help you through lean times, right? Of grant ends and you need to backfill for a little bit. It's a nice way to kind of build that up. The other important thing, which is I have random topics, is indirect rate. Another component, strong component of districts is trying to really take advantage of and accurately reflect your indirect rate on how to fully get your expenses reimbursed. That's a big problem with most funding sources, is not everybody allows it. Some cap it at 5 or 10%. You know, the commission allows up to 25. And you know, in some cases our costs may be higher if your rent is high or any of that kind of thing. What's nice about indirect rates, if you aren't using them, because there is a way to do direct costs as well. So you can do a direct allocated cost, or you can do indirect. Indirect is a little bit easier to manage just because it's kind of a umbrella that you can put a lot of things under that are like impact everybody. I actually asked who all uses an indirect rate. Am I talking preaching the choir now? But you know, so indirect rates are fairly easy to administer, because it's like, oh, well, this is an ongoing business expense. It's hard to bill to one grant. You don't have to necessarily justify that, you know, 5% of the grant should be billed to grant 1 and 5% should be billed to grant 2 or whatever. You can kind of pull it under. The limitations are about there's some caps, and then also indirect rates tend to be calculated a previous year. So it's not a forward thinking thing. It's a backwards looking, let's collect that amount that we spent last year. Okay, now it's this rate based on this year, especially along the lines of the federal negotiated rate. They're always, I gotta submit the thing at the end of this month to the federal agency for our NCRA, and it uses last year's expenses for next year's rate. So you're always a couple years behind. But if it's a strong option, if you can do it. So those indirect rate is just, you know, you do your math, figure out what your costs are, come up with that percentage, update it, keep track of it, having that good tracking system and looking at what your expenses are, and really trying to, and managing it is also one that I have been doing, is if you can track it well, you can actually manage what your rate is, so you can try to offset costs and try to keep it at a level that doesn't get out of control, or you can really keep an eye on that. Because sometimes funding agencies don't like it if you show up with a 70% indirect rate and try to get 70% of the cost, you know. And so trying to manage it and trying not to go overboard, but finding that good balance is really important. But with the federally negotiated one, this is a more formal agreement that you do that process annually. And then you can use this document. You get a signed agreement with what they call a cognizant agency, probably the one you work with the most. And they will actually, then you can use that to justify your rate. You can go to anybody and say, hey, we worked with the feds. And we went through the process. They looked at it too and said, yes, we agree. This is your approved rate. And you can use it on just about any federal agreement you have. RCPP didn't like it. But you know, you can use it for most of them. There's some exceptions and laws and such, and then you can also, I just use it for if somebody goes, hey, what's your indirect rate? You just send them that. And you're like, here you go, here's all the proof you need. And it's a nice thing that you have. And the biggest challenge with it is that initial lift of getting it. You have to have an agency who wants to work with you on it and puts it into the queue to prioritize it. And it's always like, and if you don't work with a lot of federal agencies or you have small grants with them, it's not worth their time. So like we got it a long time ago because we had a lot of Bureau of Reclamation contracts for large sums of money. And so we pushed it through. This was before my time. So I just didn't get anything from it. So, but we were able to convince them, they were supportive and said, let's get this done. And then it's an annual maintenance and it's well worth, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's well worth the time. Once it's in place to never let it expire. My rate right now, we're at 30%, but I'm bringing it down. I'm trying to keep it low as I can and really be focused on that.
What is the difference between indirect rate and overhead?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. They call them different things. Sometimes overhead can have a negative connotation to it for some agencies and people like they like indirect better. I don't know. It's just like a comfort thing. So it's interchangeable in terms of what it's called. Yeah.
So you just touched on my question, which is, you don't want to max out your rates because then it's harder to apply for grants.
Yes.
And so, but you'd like to have it more than 10%. How do you find that balance?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the question was, how do you find the balance of maxing out the rate versus and like trying to avoid the de minimis 10% thing, but finding what you need. So it depends. So it really it depends on your philosophy on what can burn a rate, increase the rate a ton of staff time. So, rent is very obviously something that should be in there. Is it things like, insurance, like stuff that just gets everything benefits from is pretty basic stuff you throw in there. And then then at some point you decide, well, how much of my financial staff person's time, how much of a manager's time should be billed to indirect? And what we kind of added stuff where we kind of got really easy. It's easy to build to indirect. Oh yeah, I'm just doing general stuff, indirect, right? It's super easy, but you can very quickly balloon this budget. And so we were steadily in the 20-25% range. I think that's a decent amount. But if your rent costs go up a ton or you have high rent, don't be shy about being real about this as well. But we just we crept into, now we have 2 full-time people billing to overhead. Is that a legit thing? Probably not. We could do some more direct billing or that kind of thing.
If I can follow up with
Yeah.
that, because, so when we do our calculations for indirect, usually we get something around 40-something percent. And, but my grant writers, they don't want to assess 40-something percent. It makes it difficult for them to write their work. So my understanding with the NICRA rate is if your calculation is 40%, that's what you get. And that's what you've got to include in your grant. So you can't say just 25%. And is that?
You can negotiate, you can work when you do the agreement, you can actually negotiate a lower rate if you feel like you need to or want to. Like we with COVID, we kind of said we had higher administrative costs, so we kept a higher rate, but this last one we calculated out like 32%. And I said, no, let's keep it down a little bit because our costs have been dropping. And I don't want to, I guess it's great to reflect, but I don't want to. I'd rather spend that time on staff time and such. So yeah, that one, at least with the feds, I don't know if you have to or not, but the swing between 40% and 10% is quite a lot. But you can say, let's I know it's right now it's 40%. Let's actually agree on a number because part of it is a negotiation too. So you're not super beholden to it, but it's not necessarily in your best interest to let's call it 10%, even though it's 40%. But being aware of it is an important step because on the back to rates and charges component as part of our issue is it's 30%, but we're not collecting 30% everywhere. And so we have to pay for stuff somehow. And luckily we have rates and charges. If not, we'd be a lot different situation. And so anyway, so yeah, that it's kind of this balance, and it's back to what Kat was saying about making sure you have a good tracking system about all this. Because knowing what your costs are is an important thing to make sure you're sustainable, so you don't all of a sudden show, oh, I guess I don't have any money left. And I got to pay rent.
There's a comment in the chat. The state auditor's office has advised us that we can unilaterally opt to apply, collect, and indirect less than whatever rate we have approved.
So, right now you're at 30%.
Yes.
And you're looking to, let's say you drop down to 27, but college and you pay 30. Does that hold you to 27% of the college grants, or are you able to?
Yeah, so
27% across the board.
the interesting thing about federal contracts is and it makes it a nightmare to budget for, but your federal indirect rate, you turn it in every year and it changes. So with ecology, they go off of when you sign the contract.
Yeah.
And so
it doesn't-
right now, I'm signing an ecology grant with 30% on it, but next year if it's 25, I still get 30 because that's what the contract says. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting, with the Fed contracts, they actually adjust as we go. And so it's kind of a pain because it's like, oh, the rate went up, now my staff costs I don't have enough room, all this stuff. It's pretty fun.
But if you have a federal lower rate and still get that higher state rate, you don't have. To that movement. Once your federal rate is out, that means across the board.
If you can.
You just have to justify it. So the question is like, how do you, what happens if, my rate's 25%, ecologies, it will let you collect up to 30. Do you have to stick with the federal rate all the time? I think you just have to justify it, like ecologies, they don't necessarily, they don't accept the NICRA agreement, but I use it as my justification. So it's a way to do it, but you can also, if you have an alternate method that comes up with that number that help it. So I know we've done it where we don't have a NICRA, we've done that calculation ourselves and turned it in.
Yeah.
And that way it goes in and, you just have to prove it basically. And then once the contract's signed, they don't ever ask again. And then, but the next one, you may have to do a different number. You just have to show your work, I think. Okay, run out of time.
We're running a little short on time, so
Okay.
if there are last comments you want to make about
Cool.
this and.
Yeah, I think the last thing we're gonna talk about the small grants. I was just gonna briefly mention, sometimes small grants are not worth the money. They don't cover administrative costs. They're a lot of work. The same amount of work, $100,000 grant and $10,000 grant, maybe the same amount of work. And so unless absolutely necessary, you really should really think about small grants and whether or not they're gonna cost you more money than they give you. Sometimes they're easy, they're great, but other times it's like it's a lot of work for not a lot of same reporting, just, so there's something like that. Something to think about. And I think we have a little bit of time and we're gonna show the Kat's
Yeah, let's
decision
see.
tree. She has like a.
Shall I advance and see? Yeah. So I'm gonna hold this for a sec because it's just apropos. Pat has this wonderful and her face is in the. Here she is. Pat, would you like to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I won't go too deep into this, but it definitely piggybacks. Over the years, I've had to draw this on a number of whiteboards. When a staff member would come to me with their passionate dream of going after a $1,200 grant, and I have found a lot of times these small grants are like 1 credit courses in college where they expect 5 credits worth of work. I created this matrix and it's not copyrighted. Feel free to grab it and call it your own. The x-axis is how much money can I get from this funding source, less to more. And the y-axis is how complicated it is, or you could say, how simple is it? From more complicated to less complicated. That creates these quadrants of less money with more complexity in the lower left. Then as the years went on, I started looking at these diagonals, which there's an upper right zone where you always go for it. A lot of money with not a lot of complexity. My favorite example is either a foundation grant or any money usually from RCO is like this, although it is getting more complicated. There's a middle zone where you might have less complexity and not a lot of money, or a little more complexity but a lot of money. That would be like EPA or sometimes Department of Ecology. And then down below, you got those little $1,200 grants. You know, sometimes you go after it anyway. There can be reasons, politics. Sometimes you got to keep that person happy because it's their passion to get that $1,200 and you want them to be happy, right? Or you might want to test a pilot idea. The matrix is a good way to get the point across to staff when you're asking them to go after external funding. Here's the zones we're looking for.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go back.
We randomly send that to ecology.
They don't care. They don't care.
So we have just a couple of minutes. Are there any burning questions, comments, additions from the room? Between you and getting on the road to go home. All right, let's thank our presenters and say great. Thank you all. All right, and I hope folks are available to, if folks have follow-up questions, if they can reach out to the three of you. Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you all so much. Safe travels, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Pat. Thank
Sure.
you.
Bye, everyone.